All right, everybody. We're gonna do a little joint episode here. Give the Browns Instantish reaction as well as uh, Indians off-season primer. So let's get right into it. Welcome to Buckeye Banter, Sports in the OH. Honestly, I'm not gonna give the Browns much credit with the hat. Even I'm gonna go straight to the Indians hat because let's face it, that Browns loss yesterday was embarrassing, disappointing. Now, I understand losing Chubb and OBJ is going to be devastating to any team. Um, I know people are saying, well, they played better without OBJ after he left the game. Yeah, that'll happen from time to time, but I think it makes me remember back to that Ohio State game years ago with Teddy Ginn Jr., and he went down. And those who are familiar enough with the game and all the aspects of the game, I think realize, especially the wide receiver position and the cornerback position, where you play so many of them at the same time, losing that top one really does have a different impact. Um, all of a sudden, the guy who's demanding a double team often, who's being covered always by the best cornerback, is now not there. And so now the guy who looks pretty good in the slot or as that fourth receiver, because he's getting covered by the third or fourth cornerback, um, doesn't look so good when he's all of a sudden being covered by the second or third cornerback. Just like the number two receiver is not as good when he's covered by that top uh, cornerback. Now, we're fortunate enough to have Jarvis, who is, I think, just as solid as a number one in a different kind of receiver than OBJ. So he can handle that top uh, cornerback. But the rest of the depth, I think, is going to get out of their league when they're trying to play against a guy who's a tier higher than where they normally are lining up against. And so I think we're going to see that. I don't know what's going to happen with the trade deadline. We'll see. The schedule is super kind to us. We go into this bye week, and then we come back, and we've got Texas, the Eagles, and the Jaguars. Now, even playing not so great, we should be able to win two of those games. We could possibly win all three. But if we play like we played in a couple of these games, we could lose all three. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen. Um, we'll get into some predictions maybe as we get a little closer after the bye week and we see what happens at the trade deadline. If you are interested and haven't seen it yet, check out my Browns trade rumors. That was the last episode before this one about the Browns. So look for it up here. Or over here. We'll have the link over here, and you can check that out. All right, so let's just jump into the Indians offseason. This is going to be a little longer, so I want to kind of hit all the major things. If you follow baseball at a deeper level, you'll kind of know most of this, but if you don't, some of it might seem a little new to you. So it just happened. We made the decisions that Tribe did on options. So teams that have club options for players and players who have options can decide if they're going to pick up that option or not. Most of the time, they have a buyout associated with them. And so in this case, the Indians declined the options for Carlos Santana, Brad Hand, and Domingo Santana. And they picked up the option for Roberto Perez. So not too surprising. I think everyone kind of imagined this is what was going to happen. Here's hoping Roberto can figure it out and hit like he did in 2019 and not like he did this past year. I understand he was battling some injuries. The guy's a stud behind the plate, and finally actually looking like he had some offensive ability a couple years ago. So let's hope we can see that again. We got some players who are going to become free agents: Cesar Hernandez, Sandy Leon, and Oliver Perez. I think the Indians would love to bring back Cesar. I don't know if they can afford it. It seems like he was pretty happy here. So if he doesn't have a lot of teams out there willing to give him more money than the Indians are willing to offer. I'm sure they're going to make him an offer, and they're going to keep in contact. But we'll see if the finances work out or not. I'd love to see him back because, as we're going to get into, their infield is basically going to be just Jose Ramirez returning. A lot of question marks. At least that's what everyone thinks, and I agree. I think they'd also be willing to bring back Oliver Perez. Obviously, the new rules hurt him probably more than just about anybody on our team, but he still has had a few really solid years for us. He's old, but he's still a dealing lefty who gets lefties out. So we'll see what happens there. Sandy Leon and Domingo Santana are not coming back. We should hope that they don't come back, and I don't think they will. So now we have the next major thing is going to be arbitration eligible players and deciding whether or not to tender those players. So this gets into some pretty deep stuff for general managers and scouting departments and all of those things. And if you don't follow the nuts and bolts of roster management, I happen to play a game that kind of gets into a lot of this, so I understand a lot of it pretty well. But you basically have a number of arbitration years in which your salary is pretty low, but it gets determined if you don't agree with your team to a salary increase for the season. Then you go before the arbitration, and they determine what your salary will be. Before that, you're in what's called pre-arbitration years, and the Indians have a lot of players in that, and that's why they've been able to, make good with some of these guys because their roster is cheap, and it's going to be even cheaper this year, as we're going to probably see later on when we dive into this a little more. So the players who are eligible for arbitration, we have, I think, 7 of them. Tyler Naquin, Delino DeShields, Nick Whitgren, Adam Simber, Austin Hedges, Phil Maton, and Phil Maton, I'm not sure how you say that one, and Francisco Lindor. So if you decide to tender an offer to that player, you basically are saying you're going to pay them whatever the arbitration agreement is, or you're going to make a deal with them before they go to arbitration. But you're committing to that player returning to your roster. So if you don't tender the player, then they become a free agent. My gut tells me Naquin and Delino DeShields will both be non-tendered. I hope that's what happens, and I think it's what's going to happen. They're both going to be on the hook for about $2 million, according to what most sources out there are guesstimating. This year's arbitration is really hard to predict because of everything that's happening with COVID, and it's just a strange year to kind of look at what they've done. But no one's not going to get a raise, so we know they're going to get more money than they got last year. And I just don't see them continuing to pay that much money for either of those players, considering that they haven't differentiated themselves much from the guys who are behind them. And the guys who are behind them need a chance to see what they're going to do, and they're going to make a lot less money. So my gut tells me Naquin and DeShields, neither one of them get tendered. If I had to say one would, it'd probably be Delino, just because Naquin's getting older and probably going to get a bigger raise, so we'll see. Whitgren is going to be back. They're estimating him between 1.5 and 2 million probably. He's been really solid, so he'll be back. Simber most likely will be back as well. He's cheap and he has options, so even though he hasn't really developed as they'd hoped, I imagine that he'll be back. Austin Hedges is another one that's a strange one. I don't think anyone can figure out why. First of all, they included him in this trade, and now they have to decide if they want to tender him, and he's most likely going to be making like $3 million. So we just picked up an option for $5.5 million from Roberto Perez, and now we have Hedges, who is basically just a poor man's Roberto Perez. I don't know how else to describe him. He's very similar. So, they're going to put up $3 million in a backup catcher who does virtually the same thing that your starting catcher does. Usually when you have a guy like Roberto, you want to bring in someone who can hit so that you can occasionally, have a bat in there as a catcher, but that's not Hedges. So, but they brought him in last year knowing that this was going to be the situation. So my guess is they're going to tender him. and they're going to plan to spend $8 million for 2 catchers. Now, that could also mean that one of the two could be traded. So, as we get into some trade options later, because we're going to do a few episodes regarding this tribe off season, we'll see what that could look like. So, where does that leave us? Sorry, I forgot Phil, Mayton, and then, of course, Frankie. Phil is going to be tendered. Even though his stats haven't been as great, his metrics have been really high, and he's also super cheap. And I think they have pretty high expectations that he's going to continue to develop. So he'll be around. And then Frankie, of course, will get tendered, probably only to be able to determine what the salary is that someone else is going to pay him. I don't see him being here at opening day next year. So we'll get into that in another episode as well. So again, where does that leave us? Assuming that my projections are correct, we'll have at catcher Roberto Perez and Austin Hedges. First base, again, this is based on who's on the 40-man and who's close to coming into the big leagues. We've got Jake Bauers, Josh Naylor, and Bobby Bradley as the most likely candidates there. Maybe Franmil tries it out a little bit. I don't know if they've been playing around with that. I think they're mostly looking at Bauers, Naylor, and Bradley, it seems like. Second base, I think at this point you'd have to say Yu Chang has the best chance of sliding in there. Shortstop, I guess, would be Mike Freeman, unless something happens with Freeman. Jose Ramirez, again, I'm assuming that Frankie is gone in this deal. I haven't gotten into what that would look like, but we'll probably see some acquisition involving a shortstop, I imagine. So, outfield will have Oscar Mercado, Daniel Johnson, Jordan Luplow, Bradley Zimmer, Franmil Reyes, Jake Bauers, and Josh Naylor. Starting pitchers, we've got a pile of them. So we've got Bieber, Carrasco, Plesac, Aaron Savall, Tristan McKenzie, Adam Pluko, Cal Quantrill, who they want to try out. There's also a couple guys still right there behind them. Logan Allen and I think Scott Moss is the other one, who they're pretty high on. And then in the bullpen, we'll have Karan Chak, who will probably be the closer. Clase and Wickren right behind him. And then we've got Cam Hill and Phil Maton. And I'm sure they're going to fill in with some other stuff. So where does that leave us for offseason needs? Obviously, there's a lot going on here. Infield, we probably need a first baseman unless they feel comfortable with one of those guys playing there. Again, Yu Chang, I don't think is who they hope to have playing and starting every day at second base. If they can get back Cesar Hernandez, then I'm sure they would do that, and he would be a huge, huge lift there. And almost surely we are going to need a shortstop. Outfield, I think they're going to feel like probably they can scrap together two out of that group, and hopefully they'll bring in one player who can play the corner better than any of them. But who knows? Maybe we'll see Daniel Johnson take a big leap, and Zimmer could return. This is our Indian outlook always for the outfield, right? So reliever, we probably need one of those as well. Even if Perez comes back, who knows? Maybe if Hand doesn't find the market out there that he's looking for, I'm sure they would love to bring Brad Hand back, but they didn't want to pay him $10 million, and apparently neither did anyone else. So they declined that option. Next up is the November 20th date. After that, we're going to have what's called the 40-man roster being turned in for the Rule 5 draft. So quickly, what is the Rule 5 draft? Again, I'm getting into kind of the roots here, which a lot of you maybe not are interested in. I personally find it intriguing, so I've learned a lot about it. But you're talking about a draft in which minor league players who are not protected on the 40-man roster are made available to the other teams. After having served a certain amount of time in the minor league system, if you have not been brought up to the 40-man roster, you at this date, which is now November 20th this year, if you're unprotected, you become available to all the other teams in the league. And a draft takes place in order of the reverse order of your finish from the year before. And the teams are able to pick a player in each round. And the compensation, I believe, is based on the round that you select them in. But it's pretty minimal. And as a result, if you draft a player, that player must remain on your major league roster for the entire season. So you can't send them to the minors, and if you have to send them to the minors, then you return them back to the team that you have selected them from. So basically, if Naquin and DeShields get non-tendered, assuming all the other things that have already taken place and that none of the free agents are re-signed, I think we'll be at about 33, 34 players on the 40-man roster. There's two guys who have to be added, absolutely, in Nolan Jones and Gabriel Arias, who they just acquired from San Diego. And so those two players will be certainly protected because they are now eligible for the Rule 5 draft. That bring it up to like 35, 36. So there's four more players. So you've got a bunch of guys in there like Will Benson, who's a former first-round pick. Who knows if they'll protect him? Eli Morgan. I think there's a few others out there who are fringe. And again, you just don't know this year, especially how teams are going to approach the Rule 5 draft and COVID. Because again, this player, if they take them, they have to remain on the roster for the entire year. So you can't take a player who you don't think is going to contribute and just stash them away, because you're going to need those players on your roster to be players who chip in something. So again, this is just a real quick primer. We're going to get into in future episodes some of the potential free agents, especially once we see how that all unfolds. We're going to get into likely trades. I've got some already that I've been considering, and I'll be sharing those very soon, especially with regard to Francisco. I think the most likely candidates that sadly we're going to see leave are going to be Francisco and Carlos Carrasco, because it's all about money, folks. This team has made it pretty clear that they're going to be trimming salary, and if you look at the salary on the books, those two guys are getting a big chunk. Jose's not going anywhere, so I think that the two you should expect to be in a lot of trade talks is going to be Carlos and Frankie. So tune in for some of those episodes in the very near future as we break it down, some potential trades, some teams that could be interested, what maybe is a realistic return for those guys. So, all right. So again, thanks for joining. Share, like, subscribe. I really would appreciate you just passing this on to someone else who you think might be interested in helping get some people tuning in. And so, again, disappointing day for the Browns. This is a quick Tribe off-season primer. And if you got questions, comments, leave them. Love to hear from you. Have a good one.